My name is Ryan Hale. I'm 42 years old, a Marine Corps captain with 17 years of service. I've done 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, and now I teach tactical operations at a training center in North Carolina. After my wife died in a car accident 5 years ago, it was just me and my son, Eli. He was 4 then, too young to understand why mommy wasn't coming home. I left active duty and moved back to my hometown so I could raise him near family. My parents still live in the same house I grew up in. My younger sister, Emily, lives a few towns over. She visits often, always with big stories and bigger plans. I thought moving back would give Eli more stability, and I hoped having family nearby would make the weight of single parenting a little lighter. Most days, it did. My schedule at the base was flexible enough to get home by dinner, and my parents helped when they could. I coached Eli's little league team. I read him books at night. I tried to build a world for him that felt safe, stable, like something he could count on. Because after what we'd lost, that's all I wanted to give him. Something solid, something unshakable. It started with headaches. Eli would press his fingers into his temples and whisper that the lights were too bright. At first, I thought it was screen time or allergies, maybe stress from school. But then he began throwing up in the mornings and stumbling when he walked. I knew something was wrong. The MRI came back faster than I expected. The doctor didn't even sit down before saying the words. A rare brain tumor, operable but time-sensitive. He said we had maybe 8 weeks, 10 at most, before the pressure would become irreversible. I asked about insurance. TRICARE would cover part of it, but the final bill, $96,000. My heart didn't race or sink. It just stopped. I left the hospital holding Eli's hand in one and a packet of paperwork in the other. I didn't cry. Marines don't panic in the first wave. I got home, opened my laptop, listed my Jeep for sale, called the bank about my savings account, and pulled every cent from the military credit union. By the next evening, I had $36,000 in hand. I was still short by 60. That night, after putting Eli to bed, I sat in the dark and stared at the ceiling. I thought about all the men I'd pulled from burning vehicles overseas. All the split-second decisions between life and death. I'd never felt helpless like this. Never felt like the enemy was time itself. The next morning, I called my parents, asked if I could stop by, told them I had something serious to discuss. My father said they'd be home after lunch. I remember hanging up the phone and just standing there, holding it to my ear long after the line went dead. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I hoped more than I've ever hoped for anything that they would understand what I was about to ask. I sat on the edge of their couch, back straight, palms pressed together between my knees. My mother offered coffee, but I declined. My father leaned forward like he was bracing for bad news. I told them everything, straight to the point. Eli's tumor, the surgery, the timeline, the cost. I explained how much I'd gathered, what was left. I wasn't asking for a gift, just a loan. Something I'd pay back in full, with interest, if that made it easier to say yes. My mother glanced at my father. He looked down at his hands, then cleared his throat. He said they didn't have that kind of money anymore. Not liquid, not available. I stared at him for a second too long before asking what he meant. That's when my mother stepped in. She said they'd moved most of their savings to secure a package with a luxury wedding company for Emily. Destination venue, all-inclusive, non-refundable. My sister was getting married in Hawaii this December. Deposits had been made. I didn't speak. I couldn't. There was a ringing in my ears that drowned out whatever they said next. Something about how they didn't know I'd need help, that I should have told them sooner. My mother even said she wished I had come before they finalized everything. My father added that the market was tough and they needed to be careful with their retirement. I nodded, slowly, looked around the living room. Same beige walls, same framed photos. One of me in uniform on the mantle. Eli's school picture from last spring. A smiling Emily, holding a cake shaped like a ring box. I stood up, thanked them for their time, and walked out the door. No anger, no argument. Just a silence that stretched from their porch to the inside of my chest, like something inside me had quietly shut off and wouldn't be coming back. The first night after that conversation, I stayed up past midnight, staring at the ceiling while Eli slept beside me. The oxygen machine hummed softly, its rhythm steady like a heartbeat I could no longer trust. I told myself I still had time, 60 days. Maybe 70 if we were lucky. I'd been through worse battles. I could fight this one too. The next morning, I filed for unpaid leave. My commanding officer looked at me with that mix of pity and respect men use when they can't fix something for you. He said to take whatever time I needed. I nodded, knowing I'd never really be able to take enough. By noon, I had built a page on GoFundMe. I uploaded Eli's photo, wrote our story, hit publish, and watched the counter start at 0. The donations came slow, $20 from a fellow Marine in Texas, $50 from one of Eli's teachers, $100 from an old squad mate who said he'd seen the post on Facebook. By the end of the first week, the total sat at $2,400. It felt like a fortune and a failure all at once. I picked up extra work, tutoring high school students in the evenings. Algebra, physics, anything that paid by the hour. I graded papers in hospital waiting rooms, wrote lesson plans in the parking lot, and sent thank you emails to strangers who donated $10 with messages like "praying for you, brother." I wanted to believe prayer counted as currency. Every night ended the same way. Eli asleep under a thin blanket. The steady hiss of oxygen filling the silence. Me at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, forms, and a laptop screen that never seemed to bring good news. I kept applying for medical grants, calling charities, veterans foundations, even churches. Some said they'd add us to their list. None called back. There were moments when Eli would wake up in the middle of the night, whispering that he was scared. I would tell him he was safe, that Dad had it under control. I lied every time, but I did it softly, hoping my voice could buy him one more peaceful sleep. Sometimes he'd reach for my hand and ask if we could still see the ocean after he got better. I told him yes. I told him we'd build sandcastles and let the tide take them away, just to make new ones again. Days turned into weeks. The crowdfunding page stalled at 8,000, then 7,000 after fees. I sold the last thing I owned of real value, my father's old rifle. I told myself it was just a tool, not a memory. Still, when the pawnshop door closed behind me, I felt like I'd just buried another part of the man I used to be. On Eli's 10th birthday, a few of his classmates stopped by with cards and a small cake. He was too weak to blow out the candles, so I leaned down and helped him. He laughed once, a small sound that didn't carry far, but it was real. That night he fell asleep with frosting still on his fingers. I sat beside him, finishing a loan application for a medical emergency program I'd found online. The deadline was the next morning. He never woke up. I found him still, his chest quiet, his lips pale. The oxygen machine kept hissing like it didn't know the battle was over. I shut it off and sat there until the room was silent again. For a long time, I didn't move. I just looked at his face, at the way peace looked so much like sleep. I wanted to scream. I didn't. Marines don't scream. We hold the line until there's nothing left to defend. When the sun came up, I packed away his drawings, his favorite toy soldier, and the half-finished Lego ship he'd been building for weeks. I didn't call anyone right away. I couldn't bear the sound of my own voice breaking the news. The only sound in the house was the ticking clock, counting the seconds that no longer mattered. The package came the morning after Eli's body was taken to the funeral home. I hadn't slept. The house still smelled like his oxygen tubes, faint metal and plastic. The mailman left the box on the porch with a cheerful knock. I opened the door, still in the same clothes I'd worn since the hospital. My name was written in looping gold ink. The return address read Emily Carrington. Inside was an album wrapped in tissue paper and tied with a white ribbon. A note sat on top. "Wish you were here." I sat at the table and stared at those words until they blurred. My hands moved on their own, unwrapping the ribbon, flipping the first page. The photos were bright, polished, perfect. Emily in a white gown, my parents smiling beside her, champagne flutes raised against a sunset in Maui. Each picture glowed with everything my life no longer had. The caption printed under one photo said, "The start of forever." I read it 3 times before realizing I was shaking. The corners of the album dug into my palms. I thought about the start of something else the moment a monitor went silent while I sat beside my son's bed. 2 worlds running on the same clock, one filled with laughter, the other with loss. I kept turning pages even when I didn't want to. A photo of my father toasting the guests. Another of my mother wiping tears of joy. A shot of Emily and her husband under fireworks, light reflecting off her dress. I remembered the hospital's fluorescent glow that same night. The quiet hum of a machine that stopped breathing when he did. At some point, I closed the album. My face felt numb. I carried it to the kitchen counter and placed it next to the stack of hospital papers I hadn't been able to touch. The invoice for the treatment that never happened. The death certificate waiting for a signature. I gathered them all together, the paperwork, the medical receipts, a printed screenshot of the GoFundMe that froze at $8,000, and the wedding invoice my mother had emailed months earlier. I slipped everything into a binder, labeling the cover with a single word, Eli Project. I wrote it carefully, slow enough to make sure my hand didn't shake. The black marker bled through the paper, dark and final. Then I closed the binder, pressed my palm against it, and whispered the only thing I could think to say. "You mattered." The album sat on the table beside it, open to the photo of my parents smiling under strings of lights. I didn't throw it away. I wanted to remember. I wanted proof that sometimes joy and cruelty can live in the same moment, and that love, once priced, loses everything sacred about it. The air in the house grew still. Outside, wind chimes rang faintly on the porch. I sat there for a long time, not moving, letting the silence settle like dust on the pages of forever. The knock came on a Tuesday afternoon. I just finished a shift at the Veterans Training Center and was stacking files in my home office when I heard it. I opened the door to find both of them standing there, my father in a worn jacket, my mother clutching her purse like it was holding her together. They looked smaller than I remembered, older, like time had taken something from them too. My mother tried a smile. My father cleared his throat and said they needed to talk. I stepped aside and let them in. We sat at the dining table, the same one where Eli used to do his homework while I prepped dinner. They didn't drag it out. After some apologies that sounded rehearsed, they told me what happened. A failed real estate deal, a partner who disappeared, retirement gone, debts stacking. Then they asked $90,000. Just enough to cover legal fees, medical costs, and keep their house from foreclosure. The number hit me like a memory. I stared at them for a long time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just got up, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out the thick binder labeled Eli Project. I placed it on the table between us. They looked confused until I opened it. Inside were hospital invoices, photos of Eli's final days, screenshots of the GoFundMe page, rejection emails from charities, and my handwritten notes tracking every donation, every call, every night I spent alone with him hooked to wires and hope. I turned the pages slowly, letting them see each one. I said nothing. By the time I reached the back cover, neither of them spoke. My father looked down. My mother's hands trembled. I stood there in silence, letting the weight of that binder fill the room. There was no anger left, just the truth, stacked page by page, showing them the cost of a decision they once called necessary. I didn't give them an answer that day. I told them I'd think about it. Then I closed the door behind them and stood there for a while, staring at the grain of the wood. The silence didn't hurt like it used to. It just felt earned. We met again a week later. Same table, same binder between us. The air in the room felt heavy, like the house itself knew what was coming. My parents sat side by side, eyes lowered, waiting for me to speak. I slid 2 documents across the table. The first was a statement of acknowledgement. The second, a legal agreement severing all contact between us once the funds were transferred. I told them those were the only terms. They would admit the truth in writing and agree to disappear from my life. No letters, no calls, no attempts to find me later. My mother whispered that it wasn't necessary. My father said nothing. I waited. After a long silence, he reached for the pen. The sound of it scratching paper was sharper than any word that had been said. When the last signature was done, I pushed an envelope toward them. Inside was the certified check for $90,000. My mother touched it like it might burn. My father folded the papers carefully, his movements mechanical. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, rain had started to fall, soft and steady. I told them they could go. They left without a word. The door closed behind them with a click that sounded final. I stood there for a long time, listening to the rain against the glass, feeling something inside me shift. Not revenge, not triumph, just the quiet sense that justice had finally settled. From that moment on, I no longer had parents, but for the first time in years, I felt free. I moved to Colorado the following spring. The air was thinner, but it felt easier to breathe. There was something about the space, the sky stretching wide above the Rockies, that gave me room to rebuild. I bought an old building near the edge of town, just big enough for what I had in mind. It needed work, but so did I. The renovation took months. I painted the walls myself, laid the flooring with the help of 2 retired Marines. We built offices, counseling rooms, a small play area. Every detail was made with one goal in mind: to make sure no veteran would ever feel as helpless as I once did. We called it the Eli Project. It's a crisis support center for veterans with children facing serious illness. We offer emergency grants, logistical help, and a place to stay during treatment. The funds come from donors, but the heart of it comes from Eli. Every parent who walks through our doors carries the same fear I once held in my chest. I meet them where they are, not as a soldier, but as a father. On the far wall of the main hallway hangs a photo of Eli. He's smiling, sunlight on his face, wearing that faded NASA shirt he refused to take off. Below the frame, I had a small plaque engraved. It reads, "He wasn't just my son, he was my mission." Each afternoon, when the sun slips low over the trees, light pours through the front windows and lands right on his photo. It's not dramatic, it's just quiet, soft, like Eli's spirit is still part of this place. And in a way, he is. Some days the pain still rises. It probably always will. But now, I know what to do with it. I turn it into action, into something that makes the world a little less cruel for someone else. I didn't lose a son, I found a calling. And if even one life is saved because of him, then Eli didn't leave this world in vain. He lives on in every story, in every child we help, and in every parent who walks through our doors holding on to hope.